Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Charity Village webinar. We will get started in just a moment. We just want to make sure that everyone has a chance to join us before we begin the session. We have people tuning in from across the country today, which is excellent. It's so nice to have all of you here. And with that, we will go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone, to today's Charity Village webinar. My name is Mercedes, and I'm the Marketing and Communications Manager with Charity Village. As we are gathering here on a virtual platform, it is important to acknowledge that each of us is joining this webinar from the ancestral or unceded lands of the Inuit, Métis, and First Nation people. I'd like to acknowledge I'm speaking to you from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Anishinaabe, which includes the Ojibwe of Fort William First Nation. Please join us in a moment of reflection as we recognize the Indigenous peoples as the stewards of this land. Let's acknowledge the mistakes and harm in our history and the ongoing injustice, and contemplate tangible actions each of us can take to move forward in a spirit of truth, reconciliation, and collaboration. For those who may be joining a Charity Village webinar for the first time, Charity Village is Canada's largest online job board for the nonprofit sector. In addition to our online job board, organizations can also post volunteer positions. So if you are looking for work or to recruit talent in the sector, Charity Village is a great place to start. We also have a ton of excellent resources for nonprofit professionals, including online courses, articles, fundraising tools, and free webinars like the one we are presenting today. Before we start today's webinar, I would like to quickly run through some housekeeping items. You may have noticed when you joined the webinar that you were automatically put on mute. Since we have hundreds of participants in today's session, it is important for us to minimize the amount of background noise so that everyone can clearly hear the presentation. But you can still ask questions and make comments using the question box at the bottom of the Zoom control panel. Look for that at the bottom of your screen. You can also email your questions to webinars@charityvillage.com. We will be taking questions at the end of the webinar, so please submit your questions as you think of them, and we will do our best to get to as many as possible. If you happen to encounter any technical issues with the webinar, whether it's viewing the presentation or with the audio, please let us know in the question box or by sending us an email. We will do our best to get any technical difficulties resolved as quickly as possible. But in a worst case scenario, please remember that we are recording today's webinar, and we will send you the full recording by email tomorrow. So if you get called away or disconnected, you will still be able to view the full presentation. And with that, I would like to welcome our presenters, Pooja and Michael from Sage Intacct. Welcome.
Hi, Mercedes. Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today for our webinar on elevating your nonprofit story with data and performance metrics. As a nonprofit organization, it is critical to understand what matters to your donors and how finance and development can partner to meet today's challenges head-on to ensure sustainability of our mission success. Join us as we look at what you can do right now to ramp up faster and leverage what recent data or recent giving data tells us matters most for sustaining and growing your nonprofit's funding. How do you leverage your data and performance metrics to better tell your story? How do you build engagement with donors to prioritize your mission? We'll share some best practices along with specific examples of how you can elevate your story to all generations of prospective donors to help strengthen sustainability for long term. Can we move to the next slide, Michael? Thank you. I'll briefly introduce myself. I'm Pooja Baker. I'm the Senior Product Marketing Manager for Sage in North America. I lead go-to-market strategy and execution for Sage Intacct, unlocking key growth opportunities. I work closely with product teams to champion products that meet the needs of the market, solving our customers' most pressing pains. And I also have with us today Michael, our Senior Director for Nonprofit. Hi, Michael.
Hey, Pooja. Hey, everyone out there. Michael Blanton. Pleasure to be with you here today. I've been with Sage almost a year now and have been working with nonprofits on their technology decisions for longer than I care to admit, many, many years through various companies. So I'm excited to be with you today, and it's going to be a fun story.
Awesome. Before we begin, we'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the land on which we live and work. Sage acknowledges that it is situated on the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. So I'll briefly next talk about what we'll cover today. We'll go over giving trends and how you can leverage them for impact. We'll also see or look at some best practices for sharing your story, how you can strengthen your story with data and performance metrics. We'll also talk about technology that make this all work. And at the end, we'll also share access to some resources. With that, I think I'll stop talking and I'll let Michael talk about why storytelling.
Amazing. Thanks, Pooja. And yes, we have a lot of ground to cover today. So I will be guilty of talking fast and moving quickly through some slides, but I hope we'll keep you guys engaged enough to enjoy it. And it's a really powerful conversation to be thinking through right now. So what I wanted to do first was kind of tee up the importance of storytelling, why we're talking about it at this moment. And I believe it's so important for all nonprofit organizations. And what we'll talk about is to tee it up, some of the framing that's important as we think about the types of storytelling we'll be discussing, particularly as it relates to performance and impact, but also just generally storytelling as it applies to a variety of scenarios and stakeholders. And what a fun, interesting week to be joining you all to talk about storytelling. I don't know if you've noticed so far in 2025, but a lot of change is happening across the globe, across countries. I sit, in a different country than Canada as of this moment, and have been following the news as we all have. So, what really strikes me about what's happening, globally, and obviously in a big election in Canada this week, is just the impact of storytelling across the board. What's happening? Storytelling is changing the way how we view our relationships with other countries, with other governments, and within our communities. And a lot of those stories are coming from a very small number of individuals or parties or organizations who are driving them. So it's really interesting to sit back and reflect on how these communication strategies are really showing up in the public sphere and in the culture. And as we get into the conversation today, it strikes me that there's probably never been a more impactful time for us to tell the right story as nonprofit organizations, as community driven, good faith, high impact, mission driven organizations. And that nonprofit stories in particular can really help unite us as individuals around real human need and experience, no matter what the macro climate is right now. So we could take big lessons learned from the stories going on, and let's apply some of them to drive some of our own narrative. One of the things that's happening in a broader sense right now is the impact and degradation of trust that's really happening in the institutions that are commonly been depended on by society. This company, Edelman, publishes what's called the Trust Barometer every year, and they've been doing it for decades. And this year, there's a declining trend in nonprofit organizations in terms of how folks say they trust those organizations. And businesses in the last few years, I believe 4 or 5 years running, have become more trusted than nonprofits, whereas nonprofits for many, many years, I think decades, had been the most trusted organizations in society. And I think it's particularly interesting to look at because trust, I believe, is more important for nonprofits than for anyone. After all, why would you give money or fund an organization or cause that you do not trust? So building up and maintaining this trust is critical. There's probably a lot of reasons for this decline. Obviously, there's geopolitical and regulatory things happening right now. But as it relates to comparing to business, I don't want to necessarily say I understand why it's happening, but I would put up two things as it relates to storytelling. And one is that I think it's become more difficult for nonprofits to connect at a personal level with individuals than in years past. Those traditional experiences, that civic participation that used to happen in person has given way to digital forms. And it's just generally been a decline in areas for us to engage with individuals. Whereas in businesses, for the most part, folks, businesses are still the biggest employer in the economy. So people still get their paychecks from business. They can touch and feel them. They go to work in many cases still. So they still have a personal connection that nonprofits need to work harder now than ever to build, given the fact that we have shorter amount of times with attention spans and limited mediums to build that connection. The other thing I would say is that businesses are well known for delivering impact, and partly because people are employed by those businesses, they're able to see that they're contributing to the work, right? So they know and they trust that that work is happening. Whereas with nonprofit organizations, delivering that impact story and proving to folks that you are making an impact in your community is something that often have to fight for unless that person has volunteered or worked for a nonprofit. So those are just two things that I would call out as it relates to this trust narrative. But keep in mind, it's a prime aspiration for our storytelling conversation. And we want to drive both connection and knowledge of our impact story to help offset this bigger trend. There's a few different narratives when you talk about storytelling in nonprofit. And if I think when I say storytelling to a nonprofit organization today, the first thing that comes to mind, of course, is telling your mission story. So emotional, you can all imagine the videos and some of the organizations that have made these stories really famous, around, who you're serving, striking an emotional chord, actually showing the people or the where you deliver your services in action to really strike an emotional chord, often in the context of establishing a first-time supporter. But at the other end of the spectrum, if you step back, there's other storytelling happening. We've got all types of roles joining us for this conversation today. And there's a really important narrative that's not always thought about as a story that's just told purely through numbers. So when you look at things like publishing audited financials, it is a purely logical, numbers driven, no narrative, no nonsense story that wouldn't necessarily be top of mind for everybody out there, but for the finance and accounting folks on our call, is probably the number one story that they think about. And our challenge today is to kind of bring these two types of narratives together. So in the middle here, you see about telling your impact story, which is where we're able to fuse those two narratives today in a way that both connects emotionally, but tells that logical story as well. And this lives somewhere in the middle of the supporter journey. It can happen throughout different phases, but it's my belief that this is the story that helps convert that one-time gift into a long-term sustainer or recurring giver, and converting that happy volunteer into an advocate in your community who can defend your organization even to skeptics. And we're really going to kind of anchor our discussion today on this middle part of the equation, because I think it's one that most organizations struggle with, because it's not necessarily emotional, it's not necessarily just logical, it's somewhere in between. So to get to that somewhere in between, what do we need? What's the recipe? So when we think about the requirements to a key narrative on the left-hand side of what you're seeing now, the four things that are required are really being relevant. So relevant to the specific audience you're communicating to. Sometimes that's going to be your full supporter base. Sometimes it might be a segment within that, but just being mindful of that audience. A key narrative connects. It strikes an emotional chord. It's even important in our number story as well, because emotion is what establishes a personal connection, which psychologically opens up folks to be willing to trust your organization. Again, even in that logical story, there needs to be some element of emotion. It's timely, so it's relevant to the current moment. So for example, has your mission story changed in the past few months, given all that's happened in the media? Is it relevant as possible in the current moment to your base of supporters? And then finally, it compels someone to action, right? How do you make a deliberate ask in your story to make them move forward? So that's the what. And part of the how you interpret that what to bring the storytelling examples we'll show later is that we need to underpin all of our narratives with accurate information. That's really the place that it starts. And this will make sense as we get into the slides. But a good impact story is underpinned by trustworthy information. To have all of these narrative components come together in a way that can truly tell your impact story, it has to start from the place of quality, fresh, shared information, because that's the foundation of that story. It is technology enabled. So you see the connection points on this right-hand image here, because without automation helping you connect this information to systems and people who can act on it and tell your story, you will not get anywhere. So certainly can't deliver timely information, and likely you won't find that best narrative that you could if you had the best data around your performance. And then collaborative, we talked about emotion and logical and balancing that. Well, it's everybody's job to tell the story in your organization. It's not the job of the development department alone, or the marketing department, or your executive director, your director. Those of you who are working and engaging in your community, you're always telling your story. And to leverage the different skills and functions in your organization to tell that impact story is one where you can really benefit from being collaborative. So that's kind of the foundation I wanted to set, and we're going to dive into some more specific stuff. But I wanted to ask, maybe to bring it home, Pooja, necessarily work with a ton of nonprofits in your day to day, so I think you're a good person to ask this question. But when you think about stories that have compelled you in the past, do you have some specific examples of this showing up?
Well, yes. You know what, Michael? I'm always curious what impact my volunteering activities have, and it is hard to get that visibility always. But through Sage Foundation, I was able to participate in one such activity a couple of years ago. It was for Ronald McDonald's House, and we created Happy Hope bags for sick children at the Ronald McDonald's House in Toronto. And unlike many other volunteering activities where you typically generate funds, this one was focused on creating these packages for sick kids and shipping it directly to them. I just love the fact that no matter how small the number, I was able to build something that brought so much joy and smiles. And this experience through Ronald McDonald's House helped me connect at a very personal level. After this activity, I spent some time on their website to know what their goals are, what their mission is, how do they approach their services, and it was during this search that I ran into examples of how many families they serve each year, including those in my region. So it was great to know how they manage their programs. And it was this data, which I actually honestly wasn't even trying to look at, but it was this data that gave me the confidence as an ongoing supporter. And I could also encourage my friends and families to do so. After that, I've given multiple times, worked on various different activities, involved my friends and family as well. So, isn't that what we all present here today aiming for? Build that narrative to motivate more people and elevate that story.
Yeah, love it. That's a great example, Pooja. And so, you had that emotional kind of personal connection
Yep.
and you explored it further and they made it easy for you to understand their impact story.
Yes, agree. So I think this is the perfect time for our first polling question. So you should see the polling question pop up on your screen now. Please take a moment to answer the question. So the question is, how confident are you in your organization's ability to tell its story using data and performance metrics? Are you very confident? Are you somewhat confident? Are you neutral? Are you not very confident? Or you're not confident at all? So we'll give everyone a few seconds to enter their responses and we'll soon see what everyone thinks. Great. Well, Michael, that's a good indication of what everyone today feels about their ability to tell story.
Absolutely. Yeah. Hopefully everybody can see the results. It sounds like we've got a lot of tentatively confident people out
Mhm.
there, which is how I would describe my sentiment about my ability to deliver this presentation coming into it. So there's room for improvement. Thank you guys for doing the poll, and we'll be doing polls throughout. So we'll test your reaction time, just in the spirit of keeping things moving. I'm going to turn us into some giving trends. So we're going to kind of explore some things that are happening at large, and we're going to do that very quickly because you should be largely familiar with these trends, but we wanted to cover them and acknowledge them at a high level because these are examples of dynamics that you should be thinking about through your narratives. And of course, most of our storytelling in nonprofit organizations, of course, is inspiring supporters to give in one way or another, whether that's their money or their time. So let's talk a little bit about giving trends. And the big story that again most of you are familiar with is that total giving has held to a fairly steady but slow growth for quite some time now and continues. So total giving don't in Canada has maintained a similar slope. But the number of folks and the percentage of Canadians who are participating in a giving motion has declined, depending on the data source, somewhat aggressively. So if you look at the tax returns that folks are filing according to this year's Canada Helps report, it's declined from 25% in 97 to 17% now. If you ask them directly, and I think this one's from Statistics Canada, so blending a few data sources here, it's declined about 22% in the last decade or so. And that has been against really all donating cohorts. So it's clear that you need to be good at educating new donors very, very quickly, because we've seen that overall participation and the number of people giving is going down. So we need to educate them, not just in terms of our cause relative to other organizations, but maybe educating them in a way that reminds them what nonprofits are uniquely positioned to do in general, because we've seen such a precipitous decline in that participation of nonprofit giving, that be thinking about how you're educating folks in every interaction, because the familiarity isn't what it used to be. Another thing that we encourage you to look at is to always be benchmarking in and outside of your cause area. This is a breakdown of current Canada donations in terms of the percentage of people who responded saying they're giving to a particular cause area. So healthcare tops the list with 55% of respondents in this Canada Helps survey saying that they donate to that cause area. Social services comes in second. So the popularity of these different causes shifts over time. One thing that's helpful in framing your story is obviously talking to peer organizations, what's working with them, where are they focusing, who are they targeting, but also think about what's happening big picture. What's happening in the last few months, for example, culturally, demographically. Are there cause segments that you can see on this list that you could maybe specifically position your cause to as an adjacent cause? So a lot of nonprofit organizations would think about partnering with other organizations. So for example, I'm an early childhood educator organization focused on early childhood education. I partner with my local zoo to do a fundraiser because they have a high volume of kids. But should I be thinking about maybe this category of animal charities, and could I appeal more broadly to the sentiment of the segments who support that group today, and maybe tell my story as part of that? So just be thinking across, how does my narrative fit into these different cause areas in unique ways as things change over time based on macro trends. The other big thing would be aging donors. So not a new story here, but a larger concentration of the giving is happening with older individuals who have wealth. And this has actually been accentuated in the past 10 years, according to the data, where the growth in giving from 55 and older individuals has grown faster than other cohorts. And this one to me is interesting. It seems like we maybe are in a little bit of a chicken and an egg scenario with our approach to younger generations, because when asked the question, if your organization has implemented specific strategies to engage with younger Canadians, only 21%, almost 22% said yes. So are they not giving because we aren't reaching them, or are we not reaching them because they're not giving, or which is causing which? But this has to be addressed. So in your strategy, in your impact narrative, because younger voters need to be taken into consideration, into particular when it comes to an impact story, we know we need to be thinking about this. We need to be bringing faster, more succinct narratives in a digital form that'll make our impact clear and simple. And we'll dive into this a little bit more in a second, but I think we're going to stop for another quick poll.
Yes. Yes, we are. So, polling question number 2. Which giving trend has impacted your organization the most over the past year? Is it fewer donors giving larger amounts? Is it shift in the donor demographics? Is it increased donor research before giving? Is it the pressure for more financial transparency? Or you don't think there's any major trend that is impacting? So no major impact noticed. Be interesting to see, Michael, what trends.
I'm always interested to see the poll reactions. Yeah.
I think we'll give everybody a few more seconds.
A different type of poll happening today.
Yeah, yeah. So here are the results. I think fewer donors is what's being seen the most.
So a lot of folks saying no major impact noticed. So that's interesting. I'd be curious to see, what folks' roles are who are saying that. But fewer donors giving larger amounts, definitely one of the more prevalent trends happening. So thank you all for sharing that. Okay. So with those big trends in mind, we're going to take a few minutes to double click into some more specific insights around giving, and then we'll move on to some best practices around storytelling. Most donors research organizations before giving. It sounds logical, but I actually think if you look at the data, it's pretty surprising. So 56% of donors who are surveyed, according to CSS Fundraising, say they actively research an organization before but they spend their money to make a gift. Obviously, the shift to online giving and people being present at a computer or at their tablet or at their mobile device makes it a little bit easier for them to do some cursory level of research before giving. So this trend has just continued to go up. And if you double click into the 56%, what are they researching before they're giving? 70% of them said overall efficiency. So the number one thing they're looking for first as a researcher or organization is how well you are delivering results based on your resources. And I thought that was super interesting, just makes a huge case for telling your impact story. Within that, 39% of all donors say they are tracking results on an ongoing basis for most or all the nonprofits they support. But what strikes me even more than that is that millennials, 2/3 of them say that they're doing that. So a much stronger tilt to the younger generation to be keeping up with those organizations. Now think back to our data points earlier about trust and how it's declining a little bit in the grander scheme. So there's never been a more important time to have your information available to those folks who are building trust with your organization or needing to establish that trust. So donors, when asked by the same poll, say what inspires them to give more. The number one thing they said was making a compelling case of extraordinary need. So I interpret this as a specific solid argument as to why folks need to give more, supported by data. Is it a specific program you're launching? Is there a macro event you're trying to react to? What is different than just your cause in general that would inspire someone to give more or more often? Of course, this doesn't have to point to a restricted gift, because some people might not unnecessarily tie those things together. But how can we be more specific and transparent in terms of where we want to drive that impact with those dollars? You'll see that a few of the responses here are related to how donors are being solicited, and indicates that they want something compelling and unique, but not necessarily merchandise. So that's the second item on the list, with stop, send, and trinkets. So we need a very thoughtful approach if we're just trying to catch attention with ways like including a goodie or anything through direct mail. At the end of the day, it's concrete performance-related communications that are driving more giving. A quick note, this isn't a workshop on marketing channel strategy, but be mindful as you think about your target audience, how they tend to best receive the message. What communication mediums are they most receptive to? So pretty obvious, younger demographics, social media and mobile are going to be a dramatically more important part of your communication strategy with that audience. Direct mail has a role with older, higher wealth audience. Your website, however, has a pretty universal appeal. In all of these mediums, your impact story has to be clear, and you've got to have an element of your impact story that is short form in nature. Think of this as a critical element of your brand, because that is how you can be pervasive across all these channels, talking about what you're doing with those funds. Particularly for younger donors, you need something quantifiable, and it needs to be able to fit into almost a tagline brief communication that could be read on a mobile device, but expanded in later parts of the journey, like your website, like written documents, etc. But you should really have a messaging framework that includes numbers in your communication strategy, even for first-time donors. Our own research this year, which will be launched in our Canadian Nonprofit Tech Trends report coming up in the next month or so, it indicates that funders, care about these top things. So we asked the question to many nonprofit organizations about, when they're thinking about their funders, what are the top 3 reasons your individual donors donate to your organization? And that's on the left-hand side of the screen. I apologize, this is a lot of data here. And then on the right-hand side of the screen, same question, but what about your corporate or government, i.e. institutional funders? And right at the top of both of these lists is demonstrating measurable impact of donor dollars. Not striking an emotional chord, not identifying with the mission, but even for individual donors, how are we demonstrating a measurable impact? So I thought that was super compelling. And again, we're going to be publishing more data around this. The other thing that I would say is kind of unique is you look at the number 2 on each of these lists, On the donor side, it is create a compelling narrative to explain the mission. So that emotional story, right? The classic first-time supporter story that we talked about. On the right-hand side, you don't see that. Much more logical, right? When you're talking to a government funder, et cetera, it's going to be more about the numbers. But what I would say is on the right-hand side, number 3 on the list is meeting donors' values. And that ties back to how we're connecting with our donors. How are we telling them the right stories? How are they perceiving us as a brand? So both are really showing up in different ways on this list, but clearly on with individual donors, that balance of impact and measurement and numbers with meaningful narrative about the mission is obvious in the data. So with that, we're going to go to a third polling question here.
Yes. So the question is that which of the following is your biggest challenge when communicating your nonprofit's impact? Is it gathering reliable data? Is it linking metrics to your mission? Is it telling a compelling story? Is it limited technology or tools? Or lack of staff time or expertise? I know somebody in the Q&A just mentioned that if we could leave the questions longer, a little bit longer. So let's give a few more seconds for everybody to answer.
Sure, we want y'all to have the time to be thoughtful in your response. Sorry about that. We're just excited to cover a lot of content here.
For sure.
And while that's up, while we've got some airtime, reminder, you can be submitting Q&A throughout the session. Pooja and I will try and keep an eye on it, but we'll definitely be answering some questions at the end. You can ask them anytime in the Q&A box.
Okay. Oh. Here it is.
Okay, so let's leave this up for a second. Yeah. Biggest challenge, gathering reliable data. Wow. Totally understand. Well, no, I'm sorry. It's actually lack of staff time and expertise. Interesting. Okay. Both of those, big deal. Okay. And then linking metrics to your mission comes in third there. And please chat if you're not seeing these. I think everybody's seeing these. Okay. All right, we're gonna move on here. Thank you for the polls. We are working, you guys. There'll be 2 more questions, just so you know. We're not gonna do 100 question survey here. Let's move into some thoughts around best practices for sharing that story, because we looked at a lot of examples, and these are going to be very simple. These are going to be common sense, but hopefully, inspire you to think creatively and just build a framework for doing more of this. So here's the basic flow on telling your impact story. Share the vision, build the brand, communicate the impact, and then once you've done those 3 things, expand the reach. Nail it and then scale it, if you will. So not particularly complicated. When you think about sharing the vision, this is landing your mission home very quickly in a way that illustrates your unique approach to serving the need, right? How are you solving problems in the community or globally? How are you doing that? And how quickly can you communicate that is the trick, and with how much emotion. Building the brand is all about incorporating your brand elements in a way that's going to make you easier to remember the next time you interact with someone or as they progress down the journey with you. Communicating your impact, this is the numbers. And weaving this in, right, I think was part of the reason the last poll said we may lack the skills. This is the hard part, blending those 2 narratives together, and then expanding the reach, taking your message and scaling it across the channels that matter. So while this is the flow, just real quick, recall that at the beginning we talked about the need for the narrative that goes into this flow to be relevant and timely, emotionally compelling, and driving folks to action, all with numbers and impact integrated throughout. So I think the thing that's going to bring this home is some practical examples as we go through the slides. But let's start with that first part, sharing the mission. And it's all about speed and emotion, right? Because these channels that folks are normally communicating through now do not allow a ton of time. So you want to cache the vision quickly with powerful images that grab attention, connect with those donors, and clearly highlight your mission. What's an image that can show the way in which you directly support your mission, because that's going to resonate. So videos, pictures, anything that's visual in nature, if you haven't already, think about creating a brand approved library and make sure it applies to all mediums. But at least be looking at different forms of images, even as a leadership team, to talk about what are images that really best connect with our story and that we would be comfortable kind of tying to our brand. Big brands have this nailed, right? Greenpeace and Red Cross and a lot of the NGOs, that are out there with tons and tons of dollars behind marketing. You can draw inspiration from them. But I would say, if possible, choose imagery that relates to how you drive outcomes. So, for example, if you're a food pantry, you ultimately only drive outcomes when you feed people, not when you receive goods in the warehouse, right? So that may be an oversimplified analogy, but think about that, because when you're telling that story quickly and you're talking impact, you want to show that impact in terms of the outcome. Imagery is probably the easiest way to do that. Secondly, about carrying your brand on through your messaging. Brand is a really powerful tool that's going to help your supporters remember you and quickly recognize your organization and mission. When you combine powerful images with well-branded messages and numbers, you kind of got the trifecta there. You're helping folks remember at you and recognize you and remember your impact, which translates to greater overall responsiveness to your message. So make sure that your messaging and branding is consistent and is pervasive throughout your communications. And that should be something that you should be aligned on as part of your strategic plan, whether that's digital ad or social media, in-person event. Make sure that brand carries throughout. Now we get to talking about that impact side of things. So sharing your impact, which, a lot of you said was the tricky part. And I'm going to draw from some charity water examples. So using your best strategy to figure out the way in which to communicate this impact in the course of your normal messaging. So for Charity Water, this is their old, I don't know if it's still their current homepage, but it's their kind of landing page for their organization. And they have a quick, thoughtful, impactful tagline: clean water changes everything. So that's really obvious up front. It explains their mission, very short and simple terms. And then on the homepage, they're blending that with other things to make it effective and powerful and show the impact. So the other things here, they're giving you an invitation to join right up front. So join our community of monthly donors to bring clean water to the people they need. And then subtly here in the course of the donation form, and of course, for those of you who are fundraisers out there, there's a lot of thought that goes in, complexity that goes into these donation forms and the amounts that are recommended. But as part of that donation form, it says your X dollars a month can give 12 people clean water every day. 100% of funds go to water projects. So that is a super simple, super clear way to talk about your impact in the relevant course of what that person is doing at that moment, and explains to them how that money is being used. And it even gives them a sense for your philosophy and your cost approach, right? So, okay, well, if I gave $100, how many people would that serve? I know that they have a particular way of approaching overhead at this organization, but it does all that in a matter of seconds. So imagery, quick communication, weaving that impact story in kind of all in one at an early part of the supporter engagement here in this Charity Water example. And we'll go more into some examples from this org in a second. And then on social media, I mentioned this is not a course on communication channels or mediums, but be considering it. You saw the importance of it as it relates to younger donors. And you want to kind of develop specific strategies as it relates to this because of the unique nature of this forum. It's very media heavy in terms of video, et cetera. Imagery is even heavier here, very short form communication, but it's probably going to be necessary if you expect to attract younger supporters, but also giving them and empowering them in sharing your information. Social media, mobile friendly communications definitely make it part of the overall strategy, and make sure that brand is reflected throughout. Okay, so let's talk about one of the more challenging things that you guys mentioned from the poll, which is how do we bring in these performance narratives or these performance metrics into the equation, and how does that strengthen the story? So let's go back to our Charity Water example. And we're just staying on their website. And again, this might be a little out of date because I pulled these some time ago. But it shows you that it shows you what their key measures are, what they're tracking, and how they think about measuring impact. And you see that across their website, front and center. And it can normally be hard for folks to go find that information. But what Cherry Water has done here is they're on the left-hand side of the page, they're showing 4 specific metrics. And these are metrics that are going to show up over and over throughout their journey. So they've been very intentional with the measurements that they're putting in place because they want that narrative to be consistent, and for other reasons, because it actually helps them tell a better story if they're focusing on a few, specific metrics. So they've been very thoughtful about that. And as you get more mature in this, it can even be applied to things that you wouldn't necessarily think are really that fancy, so to speak, but can be impactful. So, for example, where we work. It's one thing to say, hey, we fund water programs in 27 countries around the globe. It actually is a lot more powerful if you show them a map and you point to the places where that water is being delivered throughout the globe, and you show this image where all these different buttons are showing up, because even that image of the map, is psychologically creating, an impact story in the mind of that consumer who's visiting that website, right? They're going to remember the imagery associated with that map, more than they'll remember the text. And this is actually an impact story, right? You wouldn't necessarily come to mind thinking about that, but that's one tactic you can apply in helping folks think about you as an impact organization, is just continuing to use that visual imagery to hammer it home. When it comes to transparency, they've done a very nice job of summarizing their transparency in one simple and relatable place. So there's 3 things on this page. It says we show you every project or program, whatever it may be, in specific details. So they're actually publishing photos of their work online. They say that they do that for all of their work. So they're giving you kind of real concrete and personal examples of the work that's being done. They're saying they're an open book, so anytime you can explore our financial data, both for, probably our reports for our funders, but ideally interactive ways to consume that data as well. So to explore our financials, maybe through an interactive report. And then it gives you an essence of our approach to impact delivery in terms of how we think about our financials. And in this case, 100% goes to the field because they're able to fund their operating or their overhead costs through more corporate or institutional giving. So 100% of individual donors' money goes to those water projects. Not everybody can say that, right? But they're giving a sense for how they are approaching their financial strategy in a really clear and simple way. And it's just those 3 things are helping build their brand around transparency. So have you defined the measurements that are so critical to your organization that they should be considered part of the brand? So in Charity Water's example, they were showing 4 metrics. I mentioned they were thoughtful about them. They are probably kind of thinking about those as components of their brand. So when you think about your organization, what could those measurements be? This not only drives your narrative, but also your technology strategy, your organizational strategy. And I assume a lot of you have done this already, but getting to an ideal state in your storytelling requires work. So you're not going to be able to track everything. You'll be much better positioned if you're able to prioritize those data points that matter the most, that are going to be the most compelling in your narrative, because you're going to have to pull those things together to tell the best story when it comes to real-time reporting, et cetera. And once you're set up for this, share it. Most organizations aren't sharing it enough, even when they're set up organizationally to report on these things. So not just in reporting internally to the board every month or in your leadership meetings, but real time to fundraisers. How can you get to a place to set that up and then make it available in ready fashion on your websites? That's what connects your brand to being an impact brand, and you become a trusted impact delivery machine. And I'm just checking on time real quick. Just a couple more slides here and we'll go to another poll. So figure out what truly matters to your organization and impact, and define those metrics that best measure this. And that's going to connect with them. Another piece from our report recently is, we asked organizations, what are the elements that you are currently sharing in your mission achievement? Top 2 things: images that show mission impact. So we talked a lot about that today. It's great to see that that's number 1 on the list. However, it was only 52% of our respondents. So quite a lot of organizations not saying they're necessarily doing that. And then only 43% saying outcome or performance metrics as part of that mission achievement story. So clear opportunities to improve there, but there is mindfulness around the importance of this these elements. And I'm just going to share one last example here from the Against Malaria Foundation. Most are probably familiar with this organization. I just thought it was super unique as somebody who's not too familiar with all the organizations in Canada. But this is a top performer on almost every charity review site. And I know that none of the charity review sites are, in some folks' minds, kind of a necessary element. They're not perfect. But this one has taken a really hyper no frills approach to their brand and to their website. I'm not advocating, so you can, scroll around on Against Malaria online. I'm not advocating that this website design is going to give you the coolest brand award at the end of the year. But I was personally struck by the proliferation and simplicity of the impact story that's laid out. Not only do they have a really short, brief mission statement right on their homepage, it's very simple to get to places to support them. They're very straightforward in terms of what they do. They outline their principles in terms of their operational approach and their cost effectiveness strategies right there on the How We Do It button, which really gives you a sense for how they approach their costs in a relatively simple business organizational model around supplying mosquito nets or bug nets. But they're also just overwhelmingly transparent, sharing all of the places, through maps in terms of where they've distributed. So it's just a really neat experience that I encourage you guys to check out as an example. And we are gonna move to another poll.
Yep. Okay, so number 4 is, does your organization currently use a technology platform to track and report outcome metrics? Yes, and it's working well? Yes, but it needs improvement. No, but we are planning to implement one. Or nothing right now and no plans yet. Interesting. I'm looking at the Q&A box, Michael, and there are like tons of questions there.
Yes.
I'm not sure if we'll be able to get to all of them, but it's a good sign.
Yep. Yeah, thank you all for submitting the questions. We definitely won't get to all of them, but we'll work with the webinar team here to see if we can respond to some of these after the fact as well. Pooja, did you want to read through the poll real quick?
Yeah, it's about 42% of the attendees feel that they do have a technology platform, but it needs improvement. So that's good. But many of them also feel that there are no plans, they don't have anything. I wonder what the reason could be, but that's a good insight too.
Yep. Okay. All right, we're gonna move, and I apologize to everybody in the audience. We're gonna have a limited time for Q&A because we're running a little bit over, and that's my fault. But I'm gonna move really quickly through these last slides, and then we'll try and do 5 to 10 minutes of Q&A, and we'll end there. So a couple of really just quick examples from our experience at Sage of how technology can bring some of this forward. Number one would be open technology. So how, think about your technology today, right? Because this is the center of being able to report your impact, but also in real time. So it has to be accurate and it has to be automated. How easy does your technology integrate today? What technology vendors out there have an open framework that make it easier to connect different sources of data? And is there an ecosystem or a marketplace through some of these vendors that you consider where you could leverage some of the more popular applications that are available to nonprofits in a pre-integrated way? That's what we bring to the table at Sage as we work with many, many, many nonprofits, is bringing partners to the equation that can bring different data sources into our financial system. Dashboards are maybe the most powerful tool, unsung heroes right now in this current environment, because they enable you to get a quick sense. This is your command center, right? Internally, it enables you to get a quick sense of what's happening in the organization. If it's done right with the right technology partner, and this is a big focus of ours at Sage, you can bring those operational metrics into your financial system to create a real picture of your performance, blending that financial and operational data. So budget versus actual, key metrics, program financials. This can also be done for fundraising. So bringing in fundraising data to understand your efficiency and programs in that sense. So really unsung hero. If you have a tool for dashboarding today, make sure you're optimizing it to its greatest extent. And then also in some cases, we are focused on bringing forward ways for you to communicate to your board as well. So certain visuals that are recommended by institutions like GuideStar in the United States, we worked with them to build out these visuals and make more ready reporting for external audience. In some cases, that could be leveraged directly to bring that impact story to the public as well. With that in mind, Pooja, maybe you could just really quick mention of
Yes. Here's an example. Sage Intacct is designed to meet the needs of dynamic nonprofits like Hope's Home. The organization is using the Intacct platform to build high levels of operational efficiency and empower its skilled finance team. They've achieved 75% faster reporting processes and a paperless finance department. And the quote here from the CFO here is a testimonial of how access to the right data and demonstrating operational experience has helped them propel their mission forward. The other one that we'll be talking about, and I'll do that really quick, is the Ronald McDonald's House. Sage Intacct has helped them with some unique challenges, right, from compliance reporting to generating outcome metrics and providing real-time visibility. The goal has been to help them spend less time on administrative tasks and more on what really matters. And the results have been great. Ronald McDonald's House has cut days of data entry each month, leading to 60% increase in efficiency. And that has helped them to address 2,000 families in just 1 year. So these are just two examples of the many non-for-profits who have benefited from Sage Intacct by leveraging data to track and share their performance impact.
Awesome.
Which brings us, I believe, is a polling question. And this is the last one. So, what would be your top priority for improving your organization's storytelling and reporting? Is it better data collection and reporting? Is it investing in new technology? Is it training staff on storytelling best practices? Is it expanding our social media strategy? Or is it improving donor engagement and transparency? And here we are. It's about collecting better data and reporting. So I think that was what we established, like with access to better data and reporting,
Yep.
whole storytelling and reporting and all of that improves tremendously. And
Yep.
it's
Yep. It's a clear winner there. Makes total sense. And again, apologize for moving quickly here towards the end, folks, but we want to be respectful of your time. And there's a lot of great questions in the queue here. Some of them are highly difficult. I think some of you have fairly critiqued me in this conversation, and that some of these organizations have pretty simple models and simple ways to articulate their costs, and some of you have much more complex missions. So that's fair, and I think we can follow up with a few examples offline. But do we have Pooja, did you want to kick us off with the first question?
I'll read out and then you probably can answer. Is how do organizations whose metrics are not as straightforward go about communicate the per dollar amount?
So you asked me the hard one right up front.
Did I? Sorry, I'm just reading out the list. So.
And I think this is an art, in many cases, not necessarily a pure science for many of you. I mean, my take, and this overlaps with some other questions, in the Q&A that I'm seeing now, which is like, how do I best define efficiency, et cetera? And I think at the end of the day, it's helping people practically understand your mission in a way that that is ultimately how you impact them or their community or more broadly than that. And at the essence, it's how many units of input produce a unit of output. And for service-based organizations, and or you're one of the rare nonprofits who are producing something that's good, that can be fairly simple. But for others, it's not so simple. So I think the impact storytelling needs to be focused more there on helping educate folks exactly what you do, right? Because it may not be obvious without a tremendous amount of time and articulation in terms of, hey, why is land conservation important? So I'd focus first on like, how do you nail that story early on? And then, you should have, right, an impact story that you've agreed upon in your leadership team and your board that's serving your brand. And maybe you don't have such concrete numbers and widgets and real-time reports to support that, but you can talk about the numbers of land and square footage, et cetera, that have been conserved, and using smart assumptions, because all outcomes have some level of smart assumptions in it, right? You have outputs and outcomes. The outcomes you have to make some assumptions on. Think through that story and what would be most relevant to somebody who's not familiar with your mission, right? In terms of the outcome. So if it's land conservation, I'm totally making this up, right? This is not my background per se in this cause area. But how has that impacted real life individuals? How many animals has that impacted? How much beautiful square footage, and real life connections to nature has that created through people being able to visit those places, et cetera. So not a great answer, but again, hopefully we can follow up with some more examples for folks separately.
For sure. We'll take just one more question. I know we are out of time, but uh, really quick, what technologies or tools do you see working best for nonprofits?
Well, that's a broad question. I think it depends on where you're looking to focus with nonprofits, right? Because it's such a diverse group. You all do very different stuff in many cases, and it depends on what department or we are obviously primarily a financial software, but also bring other things to nonprofits that complement core financial software and accounting use cases. So planning and fundraising tools, right, are things that we offer as part of Sage. But I would say one thing about technology that I believe is important for nonprofits is that ability that we talked about to integrate well with other systems. Because at the end of the day, there's, for our case, accounting and finance technologies, there are systems that offer a lot in one place. But, with the unique model that most nonprofit organizations have, I think it's really difficult to serve all your departments and all your functions with one system. That one system might be great at accounting, it might not be that same system that you want to use to do mass communication, with your constituents. So I'm a fan of what's called best of breed, and that's what Sage is really good at, is helping you choose the best tools for your organization, have the best financial system, and then merge those two together so you can get that impact story in one place.
Amazing. And I think this is a good time to move to the next slide, Michael.
Okay.
Unfortunately, we can't take more questions, but
Closeout time. Okay. And I'm
yeah,
sorry we cut the Q&A short here, folks. But again, Pooja and I will work with the team here to see if we can follow up with a few of these directly to your inboxes. I do want to give a little bit more about Sage Intacct as we close out today. Thank you so much for your time. The last question actually relates directly to the image here, and that is Sage Intacct, US and Canada in particular, we're the #1 nonprofit financial management software. I mentioned my background is working with nonprofits, so it was easy for me to make the decision to come with Sage because I was familiar with how well we can serve nonprofit organizations with their financial management and with this impact story that we talked about today. And connecting those financials to your other systems is a big piece of what we do that makes it so much better to tell that performance story. Some of the recognitions we have at Sage as it relates to serving nonprofits, if you look at different peer review sites, for a long time, we've been the #1 trusted name for nonprofit organizations. We serve thousands of them today. If you check out our profile on what's called G2, which is an independent review site, we've been the leader in accounting software there for 5+ years. We're the first and only preferred financial management application of the AICPA, and have worked with a lot of organizations to improve their strategic work and time spent on strategy by more than 75%. We work with all different types of nonprofit organizations. So you can see just a few of the brands that we work with in Canada. So all these brands are Canadian organizations today. And there's really, I would argue, there's very few types of nonprofits that we don't serve really well and really appreciate the benefit of working with. These are just some of the names who trust us. For Pooja and I, myself, she mentioned participating with Ronald McDonald House through what's called our Sage Foundation. And for us, because nonprofit's such a big piece of what we do, it's also integrated into our volunteer time. We're a mission-driven company ourselves, whose culture is prided around doing good and closely working with nonprofits, not only through serving them the right technology, but also volunteering with your organizations in the community. And these are just some of the impact numbers that we focused on in 2024, delivering our own time as Sage employees. So thank you so much for today. We do have a few resources that you'll get in your presentations as a follow-up. All these will be links that you can access. More thought leadership that's free in nature, including a buyer's guide. You can learn more about our technology through our product tour. And we'll be following up shortly in about a month or so, as I mentioned, with a Canada-specific report around technology trends that I mentioned throughout the course of today's presentation. Any other words, Pooja, to wrap up?
No, thank you everyone for joining us today. It was great. I wish we could take more questions towards the end, but there was a lot to cover, a lot to share. So thanks everyone for staying with us today.
Thank you so much for the questions, and thank you for letting us ask you a lot of questions, and I look forward to touching base with you in the future. Thanks, everyone.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for presenting such an informative webinar, Michael and Pooja. I just wanted to remind everyone that you will receive a follow-up email tomorrow with a link to the webinar recording. Please feel free to share this link with your colleagues. The email will also include a survey link that you can fill out with your feedback on today's webinar. You should see a survey link pop up right here in Zoom following the session as well. On behalf of Charity Village, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you'll join us for our next free webinar, Leveraging AI for Canadian Nonprofits, how Canadian leaders are using AI to strengthen financial operations and decision-making. You can find more information on this and all of our upcoming webinars at charityvillage.com/webinars. Thanks again for joining us. I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day.